All right.
Okay.
Recording. Hey, Tracy.
Hey,
I'll
Michelle.
just we'll do quick introductions and then we'll get going with the topics. And we'll try to wrap
Fantastic.
up I try to keep it 40 minutes. I feel like that's a good time for a chat.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So I'm Shannon Keegan. I'm kind of administrating the Marathon Swim Collective. I created it many years ago for really, it was going to be a place for my clients to connect. And then once the pandemic hit, I kind of opened it up more broadly, and it's been interesting to see the people that come through. But I have my business, Intrepid Water, where I'm currently advocating for people to swim free, which means finding the freedom to swim anywhere, to get out of the pool, get out in the open water, and swim further than you ever thought possible. And the other thing I kind of explore, I have a podcast called Marathon Swim Stories, and I like to talk about people's relationship with the water, because I think for some people especially, it's kind of interesting to hear, especially if they've been competitive swimmers, they have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the water, and trying to really find that freedom, which for me has been very kind of a spiritual thing, to find a freedom in swimming and to not have to be a slave to my swimming, and to always feel a freedom to just push my limits whenever I want to, which I'm sure we'll get into when we're talking today. So that's just a little bit about me. Tracy, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Tracey Baumann, co-founder of Swim Mastery. I'm originally Zimbabwean and grew up there and was a competitive swimmer from the age of 5 until, 18, 19. So yeah, competitive swimming was my world, and bounding up and down the pool. And so it kind of just became obvious for some reason that I'd become a coach. And so I have now been teaching and coaching swimming for, I think, nearly 26 years. Shows my age. Been all ranges of ages and abilities, and I've had the joy of working with lots of club swimmers, but also the joy of working with lots of marathon swimmers, and quite several clients, getting them across the channel and various channels, North Channel, and so it's been amazing. I love my job, and I get to train coaches and get to work with awesome people like you, Shannon.
Yeah. So Tracy and I met just earlier this year, right? It's the first time I signed up for the Swim Mastery Fundamental Skills Coaches Training, and I was just blown away by the content in the course. Having been a coach for many years, just the logic and like how well founded and how well rooted Swim Mastery is. It's really resonated with me. So I hurried and said, Tracy, coach me. And I never felt that way about anybody before. So Tracy's helping me out this year. So just to be, that we all understand where we're coming from with this conversation.
It's been a fun journey.
Yes, exactly. For our topics today, I thought we'd start I had put in a couple of questions, and some other great questions were added. But I thought we'd start with how important is technique. It didn't get a lot of votes, but I think it'll bridge nicely into the quality versus quantity question. So talk to us a little bit about your perspective on technique, Tracy.
Well, technique is really almost my middle name. I've spent many years teaching swimming and working with swimmers who have had some injury or another, often obviously swimmers with shoulder injury. And I've spent quite a lot of time working with various companies who work with joint mechanics, and I worked with Total Immersion for many years and got to spend a lot of time with Terry. And obviously he spent a lot of time working on the technique and how we can protect the body while we're swimming for longer distances, especially. So was born Swim Mastery. I learned a lot about joint mechanics and about how we can access the correct joint mechanics whilst accessing as much strength as we possibly can, so we can go as fast as we can, be streamlined and efficient, but still keep the joints safe. So technique for me is what I do. I do that all day, every day, and I work at learning more and improving, working with technique. And I think that even if every swimmer can just work on just one little aspect of their technique, it will make such a huge difference to maybe not even how they swim now. I would argue it would make a difference to how they swim now, but it's certainly going to make a difference to how they swim in the future, and be preventative as well as, helping them swim more efficiently. So yeah, I love technique.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting just kind of thinking back on my journey and just how much it wasn't really like as a club swimmer. And I know this isn't the case for anybody. I definitely have some clients or like people I've talked to in Marathon Swim Stories, or what I've heard is like people are like, oh, well, I wasn't a swimmer all my life, so I can still put in lots and lots of yards, and we'll come back around to that. But I guess when I think back on like my club swimming experience and how my coaches really, like, they would maybe make us do drills and they'd say, like, correct you maybe a little bit here and there, but I think I had been swimming for probably a good 10 years. And when I remember doing my water safety instructor course when I was like 16 or whatever with the Red Cross. And in that course, I learned more about my stroke and my technique than I did in all of my 10 years of swimming.
Wow.
Yeah. And
that's interesting.
Yeah. Like it just wasn't, it was more about just yards, putting in yards, distance, and then just trying to go faster somehow, but not really knowing exactly what to do to get faster. And it's interesting too, when I think about technique, when I look at, especially, I think there's this, I'm having this conversations coming back to me that I had just last week with one of a friend that I swim with at Masters, and he swam in Detroit with growing up in this very competitive club team. And his technique is arguably like, it's like he can go really fast, and I think that's what's hard to let go of, right? It's like people with horrible technique can go really fast, but they're just kind of like an entry waiting to happen, it seems like. But it's really hard to convince people to like slow down, to speed
it really
up.
is. I find it's and I think that what it really comes down to is it comes down to the mindset of the person that you're working with. And if you can have enough case studies and enough data, and even video, the video analysis really helps with that, to really show the difference that you can make in, to any learning type, whether they're data oriented or visually oriented. You can access their minds and really help people to see why the technique works and why it helps. And yes, it's a little bit of a trade-off, as we've discovered the last few months, is a little bit of a trade-off when you're just making those small adjustments. But as I think you're finding out now, it doesn't take long before you integrate that into your stroke, and your speed that you had before is there, but you now have no shoulder pain. And it's a bit of a leap of faith, especially when marathon swimmers have these huge goals ahead of them, and they go, well, yeah, but I've got this swimming to do, and I've got to train, and I've got to work really hard, and I haven't got any time to work on my swimming, because if I mess up my stroke, what happens if I can't do my swim? So it's all those kind of questions that I think come into play. And if we can, as coaches, we can help address those issues, and find certain times in the year that are best for making the changes, for example, or helping people understand that when you make a change, it's not that you are having a new stroke, you are just slightly improving the stroke that you've already got. So it's just this ever moving instrument that just gets better and better with every little thought process that you do, rather than it being an old stroke or a new stroke. And I think that really helps people to make the kind of take the leap of faith.
Yeah. I've been talking with some of my clients. I think I mentioned it to one of my new clients just the other day. Is like, it's not a break fix problem. It's a journey, and accepting that this should be part of your journey, because it lengthens your journey. You get longevity with a good technique, right? You also reduce burnout, which I think is probably a really great segue to our quality versus quantity, right?
Yes, exactly. And I can't even tell you how many swimmers that I have worked with over the years that have not been able to get on the boat or start on the shore of some big marathon swim that they have had booked that year, because that due to injury from overtraining. And it's so sad, because apart from anything that the cost involved of that is huge, but the emotional cost that comes with that is it's huge. And we can work with swimmers to help to help them train smartly so that they can get, take that first stroke and get on the boat or jump in at Dover or, whatever swim they're doing. Instead of just bashing out the miles because they think that's how they need to do it. So it's a big topic, it's a big subject. So maybe do you have some questions that we can use to
well, there were some specific questions, but I'll take the opportunity to kind of highlight my own journey, which I feel like there's parts where I'm just like, I'm not sure if it's like the wisdom that comes with age, or like that I just got, or that there's like the time of my life too, where it's like I had my kids along my marathon swimming journey. So I discovered marathon swimming 12 years ago, I think in 2009 or 2010. I remember seeing this woman walk up on the beach in Lake Memphremagog. She'd done the 10-mile swim, and I was just going there for the 1 mile, and I'd been nervous and training really hard, like probably doing, I probably wasn't swimming that much, but it felt like a lot for me, just coming from this background of doing 15,000 meters a week or whatever we did, 2 days and 3 days and all the stuff we did in club swimming, and then quitting for a really long time and really kind of resenting, not really thinking about swimming again, and having big fears of the open water. But without going into all that, I watched this woman walk up on the beach, and I just thought about like this notion of like she'd been swimming for 5 hours, and like she just was walking up now on the beach, and she was the very first person to finish the event. And so I was, as a woman, I was just like, oh my God, how cool is that a woman can win the overall competition.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was completely enamored. And the next year, I think I signed up for my first 10K, and to train for my first 10K, I swam a 10K every Saturday. Like once I worked up to it, I swam a 10K like every Saturday, preparing for this 10K. And I went to that thing still petrified, that I was, whether I was going to be able to finish or not. And so, going through the year, but then I got pregnant, and then I realized I still really had this draw to the open water and to like seeing what I was capable of in the water. But I had now had a baby. So like, how do you manage this? So I started really focusing. I felt like I knew I could swim a really long time, especially when I was swimming and I was pregnant. It's like with morning sickness and dealing with all these other things, I didn't always make it to the pool when I wanted to, but then when the event day would come around, I was ready to swim because I wasn't burnt out. I wasn't tired. I probably had some other things leading into that helped me kind of realize like that it really wasn't all about the training. And then I started really focusing in on my technique and being like, well, wait a sec, what if I could make it so that I'm not working as hard when I'm swimming? And then I know that I just have to keep swimming, because I don't know what clicked exactly after that 10K. I think I was invited, now that I think about it, I was invited to swim a relay across Lake Memphremagog in 2011. And I was having a really hard time motivating to train for it because it was in like September, and like they were getting fall day. And basically I had hardly been swimming at all, but we were just going to be doing like 2-hour shifts. And what happened on the day of the relay is my relay partner wasn't able to get back in after I swam my 2-hour shift. And I just kept going. And I realized that was where the shift was for me. It's like, I realized, I can keep going. And I didn't end up making it to the end, but I swam about 5 or 6 hours, and I had hardly trained at all. And I was like, wait a second, there's something to this.
But it takes something like that to shift the mind for me, and this was an experience that I had for myself, but an experience I had as a coach of one of my swimmers. So she had a round Jersey swim booked, and then 3 weeks later she had the Channel booked. And they're two epic swims, round Jersey, obviously tide assisted, but I think it's 67K or something. And obviously the Channel is the Channel. And for whatever reason, for one reason or another, she didn't get to the pool very much. I think it was end of July. She didn't get ready to the pool very much at all before before her swim, she went to 1 10K swim, and we'd been working together for several years, so we'd been working on her technique, and she had a beautiful stroke. She was accessing great joint positions, really had found the power in her. We'd synchronized it up, so she was finding the power and stuff, but she wasn't really swimming. And in June, she went to a 10K swim and absolutely just, nailed it, did a really good time, like her best time ever. And she said, actually, I felt really good after that, because she was a bit worried.
Yeah.
And then I think she did a few swims, like not many. I think she went down to Dover a few times. I think she maybe did 1 6 hour, if I remember rightly. And then she went round Jersey, and she went round Jersey in, I think it was 11 hours, if I can remember. And she got out at the end, and everyone who was on the boat, they just said that she looked just as good at the end as she did at the beginning. And she got out at the end and was good to go. The next day she had no aching or anything, and then literally 3 weeks later to the day, she swam the channel, and
wow.
did a great swim. It was a long swim because it was a pretty bad tide, but I think she did 16 and a half hours. But again, the next day, we were up, and I was down there, and we were up at breakfast, and she was, around and about, and arms moving everywhere. And that was for me the turning point in making me have the confidence to realize that it's not about all these hours and hours and hours of swims just for swimming's sake, but it's really about spending the time in the pool or the lake or the sea, whichever it is, doesn't matter, making sure that you're working on every stroke that you are, so that every stroke you do is better than the one before. And that really gave me confidence as a coach to help people through this, to get this slightly different mindset about quality over quantity.
Yeah, the other thing,
slightly mad way of figuring it out, but
yeah, no, that's awesome.
I would recommend that.
right, not necessarily. I always come away from a swim. I always come away from a swim where I feel like I hardly trained before, going like, well, I don't know if I should do that again, but it seemed like it worked okay.
But it worked. Yeah.
So, but it is interesting to figure out how to bridge, how to make that jump. And I think it's interesting to hear your perspective on it too. I guess the other thing, I was as a coach, when I started getting into marathon swimming, I had in a prior life had considered like running marathons, and I'd heard of the marathon training plan where you only do like two or three shorter runs during the week, and then you do one long run on the weekend. And I was like, well,
and you never swim the distance, you never run the distance, right? You never do a marathon before you rock up at a marathon. That it makes total sense that you then wouldn't do the same for swimming, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I definitely took
the same body.
Right. Yeah. And it's even an easier sport. It's like, I was having this conversation with some family members who are getting ready for like an ultra marathon run. And I was just talking to them about how much easier it is to do that if you're swimming, because it's like you don't have to deal with the joint pain, and I don't know, like
exactly,
it's not my favorite thing. There's definitely people that love it.
Yeah, mine either.
And that's kind of an interesting thing too, I find as a coach, is there's people that you meet that they love this daily swim, and I think that was one of the questions after the survey was how many like shorter swims versus mid-length swims versus longer swims. And I would say if you're a person who needs to swim every day, that's fine, swim every day. But it doesn't have to be a 10K every day.
Exactly.
Like it could be 2 to 3K. It's more, I think what you said, I love that phrase, making each stroke better than the one before.
Yeah, I think also what is sometimes also a good way of approaching training for marathon swimming particularly is to actually not even focus on the mileage. Is to actually just focus on time time in the water, and how do you want to spend that time in the water? So, you know, part of swimming is about the enjoyment side of it, the ability to just be in this medium that just supports you, and no phones can get hold of you, and no emails can get to you, and no kids can call you, and you've just got your own time and your own space. And there's a lot to be said for spending some time just enjoying that each week. And then, you know, so I always encourage my swimmers to say, what time do they have to give to water each week, rather than how far do they have to swim. I don't care how far they swim. I don't think I've ever asked you how far you swam. I don't even care. I just care about how much time you spend in the pool, and then what the client is actually doing in the pool. And we want to, you know, if our goal is to improve our swimming so that we can swim for longer, and I mean for longer as in distance, but for longer as in age wise as well, then we just need to put some thought processes into the strokes we're taking. And we can just spend an hour, or we can spend 2 hours. And even, you know, 20 minutes, I say to people, you know, if you've even got just 20 minutes a couple of times a week to just jump in, those are probably almost the most beneficial swims you'll do a week, because you'll be focused, you'll be making changes, you'll be, you know, really on board, because you know you haven't got long. And then do some longer swims, you know, in the rest of the week. So that's kind of how I talk about it. So no, I don't talk about distance at all. Not at all.
Yeah. And that was definitely learned to me, but when I started, after I'd had my kids and I only had 2 or 3 days a week to dedicate, and there'd be one morning a week where maybe my husband could take the kids, or I'd drop them off at grandma's, and I'd get a longer swim in. But I always was doing like, okay, I have a block of time now. How can I use this to, I always call it like an applied practice. And then my other swims, there were 2 to 3 days a week of like 20 to 30, whatever I could slip in. And I was really just focusing on some technique. And then I took that kind of work, and you just kind of go play around with how it feels in the open water, which is always a nice application, or a nice way to, I guess, let your mind, I like to think of it as giving your mind the chance to just like the thinking outside the box, literally.
Literally, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. And there's so many other things involved, you know, it's you know, it's obviously about the swimming, but it's also about, you know, getting used to the environment and practicing the feeding, and seeing how your body feels being horizontal for a certain amount of time. You know, all of the things that come with it, and that needs, you know, that needs to be part of be thought of as part of the time that you're spending in water. And I think some of that gets lost when people are kind of trying to just say, oh, I need to go and do 8K this week or something. So I think it can be quite a beneficial way of encompassing everything that needs to be thought of when training for a marathon swim.
Yeah. I like to call them like milestone swims, where you maybe are pushing distance a little longer and getting the training, whether it's beside a boat or a kayak, and you're really getting or testing your feeds over long distances.
Absolutely.
Like those are really important to put on the training plan, but it doesn't have to be a weekly affair. You know, it's a couple times before your event. So that you can get to your event excited, ready, confident about yourself.
And you know, you've tested everything over a certain period of time, so that you know that you've eliminated any, you know, stomach issues or whatever else can arise, right?
The other thing just popped in my head too, that I find with I feel like it's a trust, really, right? It's learning to trust yourself. And so you need to trust your technique. You need to trust that whatever preparation you did going in was the best that you could do, and that you're ready for whatever's going to come, because whatever comes, you don't know what it is. Like if you're signing up for a marathon swim, you have no idea what's going to happen that day. No. But you just have to trust yourself and your crew.
you do, and I think that the more you can trust your stroke, because you've spent time, even if it's just time learning about your stroke. You know, I find that half the journey is half the battle is just, what do I do in my stroke? I spoke to one particular guy who had done the Channel twice, and I think he'd done round Jersey twice and Gibraltar a few times, so quite a few big swims, and he wanted to come for some lessons. And I was having a chat with him before we met, and I was asking him, well, tell me about your swimming, how do you swim, what do you feel? And I mean, he literally didn't have any idea. And I found that extraordinary. So I think that, one of my biggest bits of advice to people is go out into your next swim and start to tune in to what you feel in your body. What do you feel in your body? What do you feel in the water? What parts of your body are you feeling pressure on? Where are your parts of body in time and space at different parts of your stroke? And just get to know your stroke first of all, because when you start to understand what you're actually doing and you're really tuned in, then you can really start to make some changes, and you just build that awareness and ability to improve and target certain specific points, because where they are in each stroke. So that would be one of my pieces of advice that I would give.
Yeah, that's great. That's where I kind of started talking about water relationship, because I was like, wait a second,
Yeah.
if you don't actually, if you don't have a relationship with the water, you can't find your body in the water, then no matter what, you're just going through the motions, and that's just going to make it that much harder if you're pushing distances.
Yeah.
It's hard enough if you're trying to do that in a 50 freestyle, but to do that over, whatever, 15K or whatever, like that's a lot to ask of yourself, and to try to.
Well, and also when the conditions get rough, and they generally are bound to in most marathon swims, you can almost count on that happening, is how well do you know your stroke, so that in that moment when things get hard and things get tough, have you got the control and the ability and the sustainability in your stroke, because you know it so well, to be able to maintain it through those rough situations and conditions. And what often happens is the complete opposite. As soon as that happens, the human instinct to survive almost, and to kind of just move the arms and legs kicks in, and it actually becomes so much more hard in those conditions than it needs to be if someone was really in tune with their stroke.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm wondering I'm wondering how to segue for the people where the speed is important. I want to talk about a little bit about how the technique can builds the speed. Like, you get the speed from a good technique, especially because I managed to speed. I spoke of this person I'd swum with who swims really fast, but his technique it looks like he's going to hurt himself at any minute. But can you speak a little bit to how you see people kind of take this technique step in their journey, and how it can, find that speed again?
Well, I think that the reality is we have to ask ourselves a question. We have to set expectations, and we have to set realistic goals. Now, the realistic thing is that the older we get, that things in our joints and in our bodies start to change, unfortunately, and deteriorate, and we have to be mindful of that. So the way I always explain it is that we use the technique as a way to harness and maintain speed over a longer period of time. So the only reason why people would slow down when they start working on their technique, the only reason, is because they are slowing down their tempo, because their brain is adapting to a new skill. And they have to think about it, because if you just sit there now and you just pat your head and rub your tummy, just have a go quickly. Literally pat your head and rub your tummy, and now switch your hands around and try and do the same thing. And it's really weird, and it's I don't know how that, I don't know how to do that, and it feels really odd. That's exactly how it is when you make changes in your stroke. So your brain is automatically going to slow down everything to try and make the change. But the reality is once you've built up that new neurological pathway, and you've strengthened the myelin sheath, and you've made the pathway super, super strong, then there's no reason why you can't access exactly the same speed And I would argue more, because you're getting your body into more streamlined and more connected positions, and you're accessing bigger muscle groups, that you can actually find more speed in time when you do that. I think it's a trust thing though, because that initial slowdown is confronting. It's frankly confronting for people, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go slower, and it feels like I'm going slower. So I think it's a trust thing, and I think that if you can find a coach that you can build that trust with, and you can work with through that journey of building those new neurological pathways, then you can really maintain and improve on your speed when you work on technique. I don't think it needs to be I don't think the two need to be mutually exclusive. I think, on the contrary, the more connected you are, the more streamlined you are, the more you're going to hide from water, the faster you're going to go. It's kind of physics, right?
Yeah,
it's just whether you can connect. That's the trick. And if you can't connect, if you're disconnected, then you're always going to get something in the way of the water, and it's going to slow you down.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the key.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I want to make sure we don't ignore some of the questions that were asked. One of them was about how to taper for a marathon swim. What is your thoughts on that? I mean, we kind of talked about how we're kind of doing it backwards. Like, you start from we're focusing on our technique. We maybe doing a long swim every week if you can. Definitely doing some kind of milestone swims. I usually tell people like about 4 to 5 to 6 weeks before, do like 3/4 distance, and then 4 to 5 weeks before that, do roughly half distance. But that ends up falling apart depending how far you're going. Something to think about. Exactly. But so when we talk about tapering from that perspective, it's not really, I don't think it's relevant, but tell me a little bit about how you've handled that type of question in the past.
Yeah, so I find it's a really interesting question, because I think it's quite an elusive question, because I think it's quite personal. I think a lot of the, we have to be mindful of not burning out and not causing injury, and so we don't literally have enough energy to do the swim, obviously. But there's also the mental side and the mental aspect to tapering that I think needs to be taken into consideration. And so when I talk to my clients about it, I say pretty much similar to you. I just do it in hours, not distance. I don't know, maybe 6 weeks before the swim, they'll do a 6 hour and a 7 hour back to back or something. I'm just kind of picking numbers out of a hat. And then they'll kind of do a 5 and a 4, and just kind of do that. And then 3 weeks before the swim, I really suggest that they kind of they can still swim. I like them to still swim and do quite a few swims a week, and keep the muscles loose and keep them moving, but probably no more than 2 or 3 hours at a time. And I get that. I suggest that they do things like have massages and stuff quite a bit leading up to the swim, those kind of things that are going to really help their body to relax and make sure that there's no tension in the muscles and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how I do it. So the last 3 weeks before a swim, I will kind of really dumb it down quite a lot. But some of my swimmers aren't happy with that from a mental point of view. Mentally that's too scary. So I just work. It's an individual thing. I know I'm not sure that that's very helpful, but so I'll tend to work with it on a bit of an individual basis. So I know one swimmer in particular, we had her doing a little bit more before her swim because she needed that from a mental perspective more than that. So I think we have to consider each individual as coaches, but all in all, I would say 3 weeks before a swim to really slow that down. Yeah,
that's I'm glad you brought that up. The question wasn't voted for about needing a coach, but I'll just say here how helpful it is to have a coach that's thinking of those things for you and helping you. Because it is so personal. I've definitely worked with people who before their first 10K, they really wanted to swim 2 or 3 prep ones. And like, if that's if that's what you need to build the confidence to have that trust on that day, then that's what you need to do. And, make sure you have someone supporting you or a network that's supporting you. That's, that makes you, I guess it's all about like feeling good, right? About the choices.
Yeah, to a point. I mean, I think that we also,
the caution being.
Yeah, the caution being, exactly. Yeah. And I think as and that's one of the great things about having a coach is that sometimes as swimmers we can get stuck in this, I must do this and I must do this, and if I don't do this, this will happen or this won't happen. And I think the benefit of having a coach to talk these things through and maybe just have a little bit more of a different perspective and a more of a logic perspective, because the coach isn't quite so emotionally involved in the actual swim, is actually really, really helpful. Because sometimes it just takes a coach to say, well, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to? So, I had one swimmer who had to do a 10-hour and then an 8-hour back to back, and he ended up injuring his shoulder, and he's never done a swim ever. That was, I don't know how many years ago, and it was devastating. So it gave me the confidence to really inquire into the swimmer's mind as to why they feel they need to do that. And sometimes it's just because they've heard someone else have said that they should, and actually then we can just talk that through and say, well, how do you think that's really going to benefit you, or what about if we did this instead? So I think that's one of the things that is great about having a coach, is just to discuss things and just have a different perspective, and sometimes just pull you down to earth to what's actually needed versus what we think should be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just thinking though, the coaches that I've heard of people signing up with, though, where they're really kind of just manufacturing like training plans for events that are all yard based. And so I guess Tracey and I probably would caution you against a coach like that, and one that's trying to really individualize something for you and really helping you consider your technique.
I think it's such a personal journey, and it's such a huge journey, and it's I think one of the most rewarding things for me as a coach is to be on the boat and watch my swimmer reach France, and it's just gives me goosebumps now even thinking about it. And I think that is it's such a great journey. And I think that if you can have a support system that really have your interests at heart, for you as an individual, I think that just makes the journey so much more pleasurable, more than anything else.
Yeah. And I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I feel like it's kind of a good note to round it out on. Anything else you want to add, Tracey? We have a couple minutes.
No, I just thank you for inviting me to have this chat. And it'd be interesting to hear if anybody who listens to this has any questions, and maybe we can watch out for some questions, and hope people. I just think that everyone out there in the marathon swimming world has so much experience and so much that we can learn from. I have so much to learn from the people listening on this call, so I would love to hear any advice or questions that comes off the back of anything we've talked about today. So I look forward to seeing what they are.
Yeah. I hope that some questions come up. It's interesting because I had the last chat I did was with Sal Minty Brovette, and
Sal Minty. Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about how like the mileage wasn't like it was so much like, about how it isn't so much about the distance, but we didn't talk about like the technique as much. So I feel like this is kind of a nice follow-up about the importance of that. But it'll be interesting to see if people come up with more questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. We'll just call that a wrap. And if anybody else wants to post it in the Facebook group, and maybe we can have a follow-up.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you, Shannon.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.